The nurse held out the form with both hands, like it weighed more than paper. "We need a signature." My dad didn't even look at it. He just shook his head once, slow, certain. "We're not doing this." That was the moment the whole room changed. Not louder, not chaotic. Somehow worse than that. It went still. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. My mom was standing by the window, arms folded so tight across her chest, it looked like she was holding herself together. She didn't argue with him. She didn't ask the nurse a single question. She just looked away, like the tiles on the floor mattered more than I did. And me? I was lying there on that hospital bed, 17 years old, heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the monitor, trying to force out a single word. I couldn't. Not because I had nothing to say. Because everything hurt. My throat was raw from throwing up. My abdomen felt like someone had reached inside me and twisted everything into a knot. Even breathing too deeply sent this sharp, tearing pain across my side that made my vision blur. I'd been in pain for 3 days by then. Real pain. The kind that makes time stop meaning anything. But my parents had waited. First, my dad said it was probably something I ate. Then he said I was dehydrated. Then he said I was being dramatic. By the second night, when I could barely stand up straight, my mom pressed a cold washcloth to my forehead and whispered, "Please don't make this bigger than it is. Don't make this bigger than it is." That was the rule in our house. Don't cry too loud. Don't ask too many questions. Don't make a scene. Don't make things harder for your father. So I learned early how to fold pain into silence, how to smile when I felt sick, how to say, "I'm okay," before anyone even asked. It was easier that way. Safer. Until it wasn't. The only reason I was even in that hospital room was because I collapsed that morning trying to get from the bathroom back to my bed. 1 second, I was holding onto the hallway wall, telling myself I just needed to breathe through it. The next, I was on the floor, cheek against the hardwood, hearing my mother call my name from very far away. After that, everything moved fast. Ambulance, questions, bright white lights, nurses cutting off the bracelet my best friend had given me, someone asking me where it hurt, someone else asking how long it had been going on. That question had hung in the air. How long? I remember glancing at my parents before I answered. My dad stepped in before I could speak. "It started this morning." The doctor looked at me, just for a second. Not long enough to challenge it, but long enough that I knew he didn't fully believe him. By the time the scans came back, the energy in the room had shifted. The staff got quieter, faster, more careful with their words, which somehow made everything scarier. I caught fragments. Inflammation. Risk of rupture. We need to move quickly. Surgery. That word sliced straight through the fog in my head. Surgery. I thought my parents would panic, ask questions, do what parents in movies always do when their kid is in danger. Instead, my father crossed his arms. "No." The nurse blinked. "Sir, the surgeon will explain everything, but we need consent." "No," he said again, firmer this time. "She is not being cut open." She. Not Emma. Not my name. Just she. I watched the nurse's face change. Not angry. Trained. Careful. Like she had stepped onto thin ice and knew it. My mom still wouldn't look at me. That hurt almost as much as the pain in my body. Because fear, I understood. People get scared in hospitals. People freeze. But this didn't feel like fear. It felt rehearsed, like they'd already decided what this moment would be before anyone walked into the room with a form. And that was when the doctor came back in. Tara Cindy, the 24th of March, 2026, 11:55. He was tall, maybe mid-40s, dark blue scrubs under a white coat, tired eyes in the way hospital people always have tired eyes. Until that moment, he'd seemed calm and clinical, focused on scans, timing, procedure. Just another doctor doing his job. Then he heard my father say, "We're not authorizing anything." And he stopped. Actually stopped. His hand stayed on the door for half a second too long. His eyes moved from my father to my mother, then back again. Not confused, not surprised. Recognizing. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the hospital air. He stepped closer to the bed, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at them. "Can you repeat that?" he asked quietly. My father frowned. "I said, we are not consenting." The doctor didn't answer right away. He kept staring, like he was reaching for a memory he hadn't expected to find. Then his expression changed in this tiny, terrifying way. His jaw tightened, his whole face sharpened, like a puzzle piece had just clicked into place. My mom finally looked up, and when she saw his face, all the color drained out of hers. That was the first moment I understood this wasn't only about my surgery. The nurse lowered the clipboard a little. The monitor beside me kept beeping in neat, steady intervals. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled past. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary hospital sounds. But inside that room, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The doctor took one more step forward. He looked straight at my parents and said, "Wait. I know you." Nobody moved. My father's voice came out harder now. "You're mistaken." But the doctor didn't blink. "No," he said. "I'm not." And standing there in that bed, hurting too badly to even sit up, I had one thought that terrified me more than the surgery ever could. What did this doctor know about my family that I didn't? Name of the protagonist. Have you ever had a moment where one person's face tells you the truth before their words do? Because that was what happened next. The second Dr. Nathan Levin said, "I know you," my father changed. Not dramatically, not in some movie villain way. That would have been easier to understand. It was smaller than that, more real. His shoulders locked, his mouth flattened, his eyes sharpened with the kind of anger that comes from fear trying to disguise itself. My mother looked like she might faint. And me? I was stuck in that bed, pain rolling through my stomach in waves, staring between all three of them like I was watching strangers finish an argument that had started years before I was old enough to remember it. Dr. Levin didn't raise his voice. That made it worse. "Mrs. Carter," he said, eyes still on my mom. "Have we met before?" My dad stepped in immediately. "No." The answer came too fast. Dr. Levin finally looked at him. "I didn't ask you." That landed hard. You could feel it. For the first time since we got there, someone in that room had pushed back on my father and didn't sound even a little intimidated. My father took a step forward. "Get another doctor." The nurse moved slightly closer to my bed. Small motion. Protective. Deliberate. Dr. Levin ignored the demand. "Emma," he said, turning to me for the first time. "How long have you been in pain?" I opened my mouth, but my father answered again. "She told you. Since this morning." Dr. Levin didn't even glance at him this time. He kept his eyes on me. That should have been simple. It wasn't. In my house, questions were never just questions. They were traps, especially if my dad was in the room. The wrong answer could follow you home for days. So I hesitated. And in that hesitation, I think Dr. Levin understood more than anything I could have said. "Emma," he repeated, quieter now. "I'm asking you." 3 words. That was all. But nobody had asked me like that in a long time. Not really. Not with the expectation that my answer mattered. My throat tightened. Tara Cindy, the 24th of March, 2026, 11:56. "A few days?" I whispered. It felt like I'd set off an alarm. My father snapped toward me. "Emma." Just my name. But it hit like a warning. Dr. Levin straightened. "A few days?" I nodded once, then regretted it immediately when pain shot through my side. The nurse was at my shoulder in an instant, adjusting something in my IV, telling me softly to breathe. Her voice was calm, but the room itself wasn't calm anymore. Not even close. Because now there was a crack in the story. And once a lie cracks, people start seeing all the places it doesn't fit. Dr. Levin asked a few more questions, each one precise. Had I had fever? Yes. Vomiting? Yes. Trouble walking? Yes. Had this happened before? That one made me freeze. Not exactly like this, but pain? Yes. Weird pain. Random pain. Pain that came and went, then got dismissed, explained away, blamed on stress or food or hormones or needing to get outside more. Every time, the same cycle. Say something, get doubted, say less next time. So when I didn't answer right away, Dr. Levin watched me with this look that wasn't pity. It was attention. Serious, focused attention. My mother spoke for the first time in almost a minute. "She gets anxious. She fixates on things." There it was. That familiar twist. The one where pain became personality. Symptoms became exaggeration. Reality became attitude. Dr. Levin's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes got colder. He asked the nurse for my chart. Not the current one. The full chart. My father laughed once under his breath. "You're making this into something it's not." Dr. Levin flipped a page, then another. "Am I?" No one answered. And lying there, staring at the fluorescent lights, I started noticing all the things I had trained myself not to notice before. How often we changed pediatricians when I was younger. How my dad always filled out forms himself. How my mom kept our medical paperwork in a locked desk drawer. How every time a doctor suggested follow-up testing, somehow we never went back. Once, when I was maybe 11, I'd overheard my parents fighting in the kitchen after some appointment I was apparently not supposed to remember. My mother had whispered, "What if someone starts asking questions?" My father said, "Then we leave and find another clinic." At the time, I didn't understand what that meant. In that hospital bed, suddenly, I did. Or at least, I started to. Dr. Levin stopped on one section of the chart. His fingers stayed there. Then he looked up at my parents. "This is interesting," he said. Nobody spoke. He turned one page around slightly, enough that the nurse beside him could see it. Her face changed too, just for a second. Professionals trying not to react. Which, honestly, is its own kind of reaction. My father saw it. "What?" Dr. Levin didn't answer immediately. He studied him instead, like he was deciding how much to say in front of me. That scared me more than if he had just blurted it out, because whatever sat on that page, it wasn't small. My mother took a shaky breath. "This isn't necessary." Dr. Levin looked at her. "Actually, I think it is." My pulse started hammering again, not just from pain, from the feeling that the floor under my entire life was shifting, and I was about to find out why. Then Dr. Levin asked the question that changed everything. "Why did you leave St. Catherine's against medical advice 12 years ago?" My father's face went blank. Not confused. Blank. My mother made this tiny sound in the back of her throat, almost like a gasp she tried to swallow. And I stared at them, because I was 17 years old and I had never heard of St. Catherine's in my life. Dr. Levin took one slow breath and said, "Last time I saw this family, a child almost died." Then he closed the chart, and nobody in the room looked at me, not one of them. That was when I realized the story I'd been living inside my whole life had started long before I could remember it. Tara Cindy, the 24th of March, 2026, 11:56. Last time I saw this family, a child almost died. That sentence didn't just hang in the room. It split it open. For a second, nobody moved. Not my father, not my mother, not even the nurse beside me. It was like every sound in the hospital had been shoved behind thick glass. I could still hear the monitor, the air vent, wheels squeaking somewhere in the hall. But all of it felt far away, because there was only one thing that mattered now. What child? I looked at my parents first. That was my answer. If Dr. Levin had been wrong, they would have said so immediately. My father would have exploded. My mother would have rushed to correct him. Instead, my father just stood there, with his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. And my mother looked terrified. Not offended, not confused. Terrified. "You don't get to do this," my father said finally. His voice came out low and sharp, controlled in the way that meant he was closest to losing control. Dr. Levin didn't flinch. "Do what?" "You walk in here, make accusations, upset my daughter, and act like you know anything about this family." That word hit me hard. Daughter. Now he used it. Now when he needed it to sound protective. Dr. Levin folded his arms. "I know enough to be concerned." My father took another step toward him. "Then get someone else in here." The nurse moved again, subtly positioning herself between my bed and where he was standing. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Even drugged and hurting, I noticed it. The shift. The room was no longer treating him like an upset parent. They were treating him like a risk. My mother finally spoke, but her voice was thin. "Nathan, Dr. Levin, please, this is not the time." That stopped me cold. Nathan, not doctor. Nathan, she knew him. I saw Dr. Levin catch it too. His expression changed, just for a second. Not surprise. Confirmation. He nodded once. "So you do remember me?" My father turned on her so fast, she actually stepped back. The movement was tiny, but it did something to me. because once you see fear clearly, you can't unsee it. And I had seen my mom nervous before, seen her quiet, seen her fold into herself whenever my dad got angry. But this was different. This was fear of something being exposed. "I said," my father repeated, louder now, "get another doctor." Instead of answering, Dr. Levin reached for the phone on the wall and pressed a button. His voice stayed level. "I need social work in room 412, and I need the attending administrator notified." My father's head snapped toward him. "Are you serious?" "Very." That was the exact moment the power in the room shifted. Not all at once, but enough that everyone felt it. For years, my father had controlled every conversation by making people uncomfortable enough to stop pushing. He used certainty like a weapon, used volume, used embarrassment. Most people backed off. Teachers did, coaches did, receptionists did. Even doctors sometimes did, especially when appointments were short and explanations were easy. But Dr. Levin didn't back off. He stepped closer to my bed and picked up my chart again. "Emma," he said, still calm, "I need to ask you another question. Has this pain really only been happening for a few days?" I stared at him. My father said my name again. "Emma." Warning, same as before. But it wasn't working the same way anymore. Because now there was this strange crack in the world. This impossible possibility that maybe the things in my house weren't normal. Maybe the tension I lived around had names. Maybe the silences did too. I swallowed hard. "No." My father inhaled sharply. Dr. Levin kept his eyes on me. "How long?" I could feel my mother watching me now. Could feel my father's anger almost like heat against my skin. And for one terrified second, I wanted to take it back. To say I didn't know. To say maybe I was confused. Instead, I heard myself tell the truth. On and off for months. No one spoke. Tara Cindy, 24th of March, 2026, 11:56. Then I added, because something in me had finally snapped loose. Maybe longer. The nurse beside me wrote something down. That tiny scratch of her pen sounded louder than yelling. My father laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "She's drugged. She doesn't know what she's saying." Dr. Levin looked at the scan images clipped in the file. "Actually, her body knows exactly what it's saying." That landed. Hard. My father's face darkened. "You want to accuse us of neglect because she has stomach pain?" Dr. Levin turned to him. "No. I want to know why a 17-year-old with a surgical abdomen arrived here after a delay with a history that keeps changing, and why your names are attached to an older flagged case involving refusal of urgent care." My breath caught. Flagged case. Older. Refusal of urgent care. I looked at my mother. "What is he talking about?" She didn't answer. "Mom?" Her eyes filled instantly. That scared me more than my father's anger ever had. My mother didn't cry in front of people. She especially didn't cry in front of him. My father cut in. "This is over. We're leaving." He reached for the rail of my bed, like he actually thought he could wheel me out of there. The nurse stepped forward. "Sir, don't." His head whipped toward her. "Don't tell me what to do with my child." The room exploded into motion after that. Another nurse appeared in the doorway. Then a man with a badge. Then someone else in business clothes I assumed was administration. No one was shouting, but urgency had filled every inch of the room. And right in the middle of it, my mother broke. "Stop," she said. barely above a whisper. But everyone heard it. My father turned toward her, furious. "Don't." She shook her head, tears slipping down now. "You said they wouldn't know." Silence. A terrible, total silence. Dr. Levin looked at her very carefully. "Know what?" My father's voice came out harsher than I had ever heard it in public. "Say one more word and—" "Sir," the administrator said sharply, stepping in. "That's enough." My whole body went cold. Because the sentence my father had started wasn't finished. But it didn't need to be. Everyone in that room understood it. So did I. Dr. Levin turned to the nurse without taking his eyes off my parents. "Call legal," he said. Then he looked at me, and something in his expression shifted from suspicion to certainty. "And call child protection. Now." Call legal and call child protection. Now. You know that feeling when something you've sensed your whole life finally gets said out loud? It doesn't feel dramatic at first. It feels cold. That's what hit me, lying there in that hospital bed. Not relief. Not yet. Just this cold, sinking awareness that whatever was happening now was real enough for strangers to step in. And once strangers step in, you can't pretend it's just family stuff anymore. Everything after that moved fast. A woman in a navy blazer came in first, hospital administration, followed by a social worker named Dana Ruiz, maybe early 30s, soft voice, sharp eyes. She introduced herself directly to me, not my parents. That alone felt strange. "Emma, I'm here to make sure you're safe and that you understand what's happening." Safe. No one in my family used that word unless they were talking about locking doors or checking stove burners. Not people. Not conversations. Not home. My father tried to interrupt immediately. "This is ridiculous. She needs to rest, not be questioned." Dana didn't even look at him. "I'm speaking to Emma." "Tara Cindy." My eyes flicked to my parents before I could stop myself. That was answer enough. But this time, I gave the real one too. "Yes." No one in the room looked surprised. That hit me harder than I expected. Because for years, I'd lived inside this constant confusion, this exhausting back and forth where I never knew if I was actually sick or weak or dramatic or broken in some invisible way. And now these people were reacting like the pattern made sense, like they had seen versions of it before, like my life was readable. Dana asked one question at a time. Had my parents delayed care before? Yes. Had they ever canceled tests? Yes. Had they told me symptoms were in my head? Yes. Had they switched doctors suddenly? Yes. Had they ever made me feel afraid to answer honestly in appointments? I hesitated, then nodded. That was when my father exploded. "She is 17. She's upset. She'll say anything right now." Dr. Levin finally turned toward him. "You need to stop talking." My father took a step forward. "You don't tell me when to talk." Two security officers appeared in the doorway so quietly I didn't even hear them arrive. The room changed again. Not louder, just final. My father saw them and froze for half a second. It was the first time I had ever seen him look unsure. Dana kept her attention on me. "Emma, do you feel safe going home with your parents tonight?" That question cut through everything. Not because I didn't know the answer, because I did. and saying it would change everything after this. There would be no folding it back up, no pretending, no going home and acting like the hospital had simply overreacted. Once I answered, the life I knew, bad, confusing, painful, but familiar, would be over. My throat burned. "No," I said. My mother started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears sliding down a face that suddenly looked older than I had ever seen it. My father turned toward her with open disbelief, like he couldn't understand why she was falling apart now, of all times. That was when Dr. Levin opened the older file. Not just my current chart, a scanned archive. Older records from another hospital system. He looked at me before he spoke, and I knew whatever came next was the thing everyone else in the room already understood better than I did. "I recognized your parents because I saw them 12 years ago at St. Catherine's," he said. "You were 5. 5. I stared at him. No memory, or almost none, just flashes, a pink blanket, a waiting room chair, my mother crying in a bathroom stall where she thought I couldn't hear. That was all. Dr. Levin continued. "You were brought in with a severe abdominal infection that had been developing for days. The recommended treatment was urgent surgery. Your parents refused consent at first and attempted to leave with you." It felt like the air left the room. My eyes went to my mother. She covered her mouth. Then to my father. He didn't deny it. That scared me more than anything else. Dr. Levin's voice stayed level. "Intervention was delayed. By the time you received treatment, there were complications. According to the record, physicians warned that scar tissue and long-term problems were possible." Suddenly, my current pain, the random episodes, the years of weird symptoms nobody ever seemed to follow up on, it all rearranged itself into one terrible shape. This didn't start a few days ago. Tara Cindy, 24th of March, 2026, 11:57. Maybe it didn't even start a few months ago. It started when I was 5. And the people who were supposed to protect me had spent 12 years making sure I never understood that. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might pass out. "You mean, this is because of that?" Dr. Levin didn't answer immediately, and that pause said everything. Then he looked straight at me and said, "It is very likely connected." I couldn't breathe right for a second. All those times I thought I was weak. All those times I thought maybe I really was exaggerating. All those times I apologized for hurting. And underneath all of it was this. A decision. Their decision. Dana's voice was gentle. "Emma, thank you for telling the truth." But I barely heard her, because Dr. Levin turned one more page in the file and said the words that pushed everything toward the end. "There's more in these records," he said. "Enough to explain why your parents were so afraid of this surgery." And for the first time since this started, my father looked at me. Not angry, not controlling, not even protective. Cornered. Whatever was in that file, it wasn't just about what happened when I was 5. It was about what they had spent years trying to hide. "There's more in these records. Enough to explain why your parents were so afraid of this surgery." That line stayed with me, even as the room blurred again. Pain does that. Fear, too. They narrow the world down to fragments. A voice, a light, a hand adjusting your IV. The sound of paper turning when someone is holding the version of your life you never got to read. I remember Dana telling me to keep breathing. I remember one of the nurses squeezing my shoulder. And I remember Dr. Levin looking directly at me before he said the next part, like he wanted to make sure I heard it as truth, not as another adult version of events pushed over my head. "When you were 5, he said, your appendix had already ruptured by the time you got to St. Catherine's." No one spoke. "According to the record, your parents were told you needed immediate surgery. They refused at first. They argued that doctors were exaggerating. They attempted to remove you from the hospital before treatment was completed." I turned my head toward my mother. She was crying openly now, one hand pressed over her mouth, shoulders shaking. My father stood completely still. Not shocked, not confused. Just trapped. "Doctor," Levin continued, calm and painfully precise. "Because treatment was delayed, you developed extensive infection. The surgeons documented complications. They also documented concern that follow-up care might not happen consistently." The nurse beside me lowered her eyes. Dana didn't move at all. And for the first time in my life, I understood why pain had always hovered at the edge of things. Why I had episodes nobody could neatly explain. Why every time something flared up, my parents became tense before I even finished describing it. It wasn't random. It wasn't me being dramatic. It wasn't anxiety or hormones or stress or a bad attitude. It was history. My history. And they had known. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry. "You knew this whole time?" I wasn't looking at Dr. Levin anymore. I was looking at my parents. My mother broke first. Her voice came out thin and wrecked. "We thought if we kept things stable, if we didn't let people dig." "Dig?" I said. That word came out sharper than I meant it to, but nobody flinched. My father finally spoke. "Doctors blame parents for everything." Dr. Levin turned to him. "No, we document what happened." That hit with a force nothing else had. Because there it was, the split between truth and the version of truth my father had built our whole family around. Not concern, control. Not protection, containment. Dana stepped closer to my bed. "Emma, I need to explain what happens next." I nodded, though my chest felt tight and strange. "Tara Cindy, 24th of March, 2026, 11:58. Because you are in immediate medical danger," she said. "The hospital is moving forward with emergency authorization for treatment. That means the surgery can proceed even without parental consent." I looked at my father. He actually laughed. One short, disbelieving sound. "You can't do that." The administrator in the navy blazer answered him this time. "In an emergency involving a minor with documented concern for medical neglect, yes, we can." The color drained from his face. That was the moment. Not the refusal, not even the reveal. That was the moment everything changed. Because for the first time, his decisions were no longer the final wall around me. He started arguing immediately. Legal threats, complaints, demands for names, titles, supervisors. He threw everything he had into the air, like noise alone could reverse what was happening. It didn't work. Security stepped fully into the room. The administrator told him he could wait outside or be escorted outside. My mother didn't say a word. She just sank into the chair by the window, like whatever she had been holding together for years had finally given out. The next few minutes moved in a rush. Consent pathways signed through emergency protocol, pre-op questions, someone explaining the risks, someone else asking if I understood. That question almost broke me. Did I understand? No, not fully. Not the medicine, not the legal stuff, not the fact that my entire childhood had just tilted sideways in under 20 minutes. But I understood enough. Enough to know I wanted the surgery. Enough to know I did not want to die because my father was afraid of records. Enough to know that this time, when someone asked what I wanted, I had to answer for myself. Yes, I whispered. Dr. Levin nodded once. Okay. He didn't give me false comfort. He didn't promise it would be easy. He just said, "We're not ignoring this again." That sentence did something to me. Because it wasn't only about the surgery. It was about every fever I had been told to sleep off, every pain I had apologized for, every appointment where my father spoke over me and my mother stared at the floor. Every year I'd spent thinking endurance was the same thing as strength. They wheeled me toward the operating room a few minutes later. As the bed moved through the hallway, I turned my head just enough to see the room one last time. My father was outside it now, blocked by security, still talking too loudly, still trying to reclaim control through force of will. My mother was still in the chair, crying into both hands. Dana stood near the door, with a folder tucked against her chest, already shifting from crisis to aftermath. And Dr. Levin walked beside my bed. Not above me, not ahead of me, beside me. That mattered. The surgery itself passed in fragments because anesthesia steals clean edges from memory. I remember the lights over the operating table, a mask, a nurse telling me to think of somewhere safe. I couldn't think of home. That realization should have shattered me. Instead, weirdly, it clarified everything. When I woke up, my throat hurt, my abdomen hurt more, and for one panicked second, I didn't know if I was alive or dreaming. Then I saw the recovery nurse smile and say, "The surgery went well." That was the first wave. Relief. Raw, overwhelming relief. I started crying before I even meant to. Not gracefully, not quietly, just tears leaking sideways into the pillow, while my whole body shook with the force of everything I had not been able to feel in the moment itself. I was alive. The infection had been treated. The damaged tissue had been addressed. The surgeon later explained that there had indeed been extensive scarring, likely from the rupture and complications when I was 5, and that this scarring had contributed to the current emergency. It didn't mean every problem I'd ever had came from that one event. Bodies are messier than stories. But it did mean the connection was real, documented, medical, not imagined. Tara Cindy, 24th of March, 2026, 11:58. That was the logical answer to the question that had driven the whole nightmare. What actually happened? This. When I was 5, my appendix ruptured. My parents delayed consent and tried to leave. The infection worsened. Complications followed. Follow-up care was inconsistent. Over the years, they minimized symptoms and avoided deeper medical scrutiny because they were afraid someone would trace the damage back to that original delay and ask whether what happened to me counted as neglect. And now, when I needed surgery again, they refused for the same reason they had refused before. Not because they thought I was safest, because they thought they were. The emotional answer came later that evening when Dana sat by my hospital bed after I was fully awake. My parents were not in the room. That alone felt unreal. She explained that Child Protective Services had opened an investigation for medical neglect. Because I was 17, close to legal adulthood, the immediate focus would be my safety during recovery and whether I could be discharged to a safe environment. The hospital had contacted my Aunt Rachel, my mom's older sister, whose name appeared in older records as an emergency contact. I blinked at that. Aunt Rachel? Dana nodded. She's on her way. That made me cry again, but differently. Aunt Rachel had always been the relative my father hated. Too nosy, too opinionated, too involved. She lived 40 minutes away and still somehow always seemed to know when something was wrong, even when nobody told her directly. My parents had pulled back from her more and more over the years. I'd assumed it was family drama. Now I knew better. When Rachel arrived, she looked like she had driven there at reckless speed and cried half the way. She came into my room, saw me lying there with the monitors and bandages and pale hospital sheets, and stopped dead. Then she crossed the room and took my hand very carefully. "Oh, Emma," she said. Just my name, nothing else. But the way she said it made something in me unclench that had been tight for years. Dana stayed for the conversation, because it was now part family, part investigation, part discharge planning. None of it was neat. That was important too. The consequences were not cinematic. They were administrative, emotional, legal, practical, real. There were interviews, there were records requests, there were questions about past appointments, missed referrals, changing doctors, and why follow-up care after my childhood rupture had been so inconsistent. There were notes from St. Catherine's documenting attempted refusal of life-saving treatment and concern about non-compliance. There were newer patterns that, once people started looking, did not look harmless anymore. My father was furious. At the hospital, at Dr. Levin, at Dana, at my aunt, at me, though he never got the chance to say that to my face again in private. My mother, according to Rachel, gave a statement 2 days later. Partial, messy, full of excuses and fear and attempts to make herself seem smaller inside my father's decisions. Some of it was probably true. None of it erased her role. Tara Cindy, 24th of March, 2026, 11:59. Child Protective Services set immediate conditions. I would not be discharged home into their sole care while the investigation was active. Because of my age and the hospital's documentation, I was released to Aunt Rachel once I was stable enough to leave. My father was furious about that, too. It didn't matter. The hospital social worker also helped set up follow-up care that did not go through my parents. Surgical check-ins, imaging, a therapist, a primary care physician who had access to the full records and, maybe more importantly, expected to hear from me directly. Socially, the fallout spread through the family like a crack through glass. Some relatives defended my parents at first, said hospitals overreact, said fathers get painted as monsters when they ask questions, said my mom had always loved me. Other relatives went quiet, in the way people do when an old suspicion turns into a documented fact. Aunt Rachel didn't soften any of it. People knew enough to wonder, she told me one afternoon while helping me settle onto her couch with a pillow pressed to my abdomen. They just didn't know enough to prove it. That sentence stayed with me because it explained so much of my childhood. The looks, the awkward check-ins, the adults who seemed concerned but backed off once my father inserted himself. People had sensed something. They just never had the one thing institutions require before they act: proof. Now there were records. a current crisis, witnesses, documentation, a doctor with memory and a chart. Now there was proof. Personally, recovery was harder than the movie version. I didn't wake up brave and healed and instantly transformed. I woke up sore, angry, embarrassed, relieved, exhausted, and weirdly disoriented by being believed. That last part surprised me most. When someone spends years teaching you not to trust your own pain, being taken seriously feels almost as destabilizing as being dismissed. I kept apologizing to nurses for asking for help, kept downplaying pain levels out of habit, kept bracing for someone to roll their eyes or tell me I was overreacting. They never did. My therapist, Dr. Meena Shah, helped me understand that. Your body learned one set of rules, she said during one of our first sessions. Now it has to learn a new set. That takes time. The new rules were simple, brutal, revolutionary. Pain is information. Truth is not disloyalty. Being difficult is not the same thing as being honest. And love that requires silence is not safety. I finished high school from Aunt Rachel's house while recovering. It was strange and humiliating and sometimes peaceful in a way I didn't trust yet. Rachel asked before touching my laundry, asked before making calls about my appointments, asked if I wanted soup, tea, quiet, company. Asked. That word changed shape for me. My father sent messages at first, angry, then self-righteous, then weirdly sentimental, as if swapping tone could erase the facts. Through CPS and Rachel, contact stayed limited. My mother wrote me one letter, 3 pages, half apology, half explanation, full of sentences about fear and pressure and not knowing how to stop things once they had started. I read it once, then I folded it back up. It didn't fix anything, but it did answer one last question. She had known. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every medical term, but enough. Enough to act. Enough that not acting became its own choice. That was the final consequence, the one no caseworker could assign and no doctor could repair. I stopped needing my parents to be confused in order for me to forgive them. They knew enough. Tara Cindy, 24th of March, 2026, 11:59. Months later, I went back to the hospital for a follow-up. Same building, same antiseptic smell, same bright halls that had once felt like the inside of a trap. But I walked in under my own power. Slowly, because healing still wasn't complete, but upright. Rachel came with me, though she waited in the lobby when the nurse asked if I wanted to go in alone. I said yes. That felt important. In the exam room, they handed me an intake form on a clipboard. For 1 second, I just stared at it. A form. A signature line. White paper in a quiet room. The opening image of the worst day of my life. Only this time, the nurse smiled and said, "Take your time, Emma, and if you want to update anything yourself, that's completely up to you." Yourself. I took the pen. My hand shook a little, but not from fear. More like the aftershock of recognizing how much had changed. Then I signed my own name. Emma Carter. No one took the clipboard away from me. No one answered for me. No one told me not to make things bigger than they were. And sitting there in that small room with the form resting on my knees, I realized the surgery had done more than remove infection and repair damage. It had ended the lie that my pain only counted when someone stronger approved of it. That was the real resolution. Not that everything became easy, not that I stopped hurting overnight, not that legal systems magically solved family damage, but my life was no longer organized around protecting the people who had failed to protect me. When Dr. Levin came in for the follow-up, he checked the incision, reviewed the imaging, and told me I was healing the way he hoped. Then, he paused and said, "You spoke up when it mattered." I almost corrected him, almost said, "No, actually, other people stepped in, other people noticed, other people forced the truth into the light." But that wasn't the whole truth anymore. So I just nodded. Because this time, when the question came, I had answered. And that answer changed where I went next.